Hi everyone, welcome to the Debaters Council initiative where we break down motions that were recently debated. My name is Rachel. I was a debater for Methodist College and I'm currently the coach of Ananda College. I'll be breaking down the Octo final motion at the APIIT debate tournament. The motion reads, this house believes that as a child of a financially stable Sri Lankan family would prefer to be an only child than the middle child of 3 siblings. Right, 3 points of characterization. Firstly, on what financial stability looks like. On proposition, you need to push this idea that even if it's a lot of money, it's still a limited amount of money that you're going to be having. And given that this is Sri Lanka, it's subject to change, right? There's so many unpredictable things, right? Investments you make could go down in value, so many things. On opposition, you need to paint this as parents, you can comfortably provide for all 3 children, right? So what this looks like is all 3 children can lay out the university options and pick without leaving one out because they cannot afford it, right? So they can live a very comfortable life. Second thing is both sides need to admit that this is an actor motion. So whoever proves that they do the most benefit to the child wins the debate. So at the end of all the arguments, make sure the goal has to be on who benefits your child the most. Thirdly, you can mention other stakeholders involved. So the next most important stakeholders become parents and siblings, and after that you can talk about relatives, teachers, friends if you want. Yeah. All right. On proposition, the first idea that you can run is about parents. Under that, the first thing you can run is resources. So resources is twofold. Firstly, you can talk about materialistic resources, and here it's this idea that the amount of resources that you have is finite, right? So if you have 100 million, that's a lot of money, but if you're going to split it between 3 children, that's still less money than you would receive if you were an only child getting the entire chunk of it, right? And this is very, very important when it comes to them not having to worry about money, right? Because even if you're financially stable, it's always at the back of this child's mind that, okay, look, my parents have to provide for my other 2 siblings, and they will take that into account when making certain decisions. And this is bad because it limits the child, right? So you have far more opportunities at the point your resources are only spread onto you. The second part and the more important part of this resources level is about resources like effort, time, and attention your parents have. Given that these parents are financially stable, it's very, very likely that they work a lot. So whether that being a 9-to-5 job or they own their own business, they're going to be investing a lot of hours at work, right? Saying that, it means that the time is limited. So you're going to take already limited mental resources, and there's only a limit a parent has. There's a specific mental capacity. So you're taking that limited amount and you're going to split it between 3 children. And you need to prove that attention is almost integral to benefiting this child, because it's as simple as parents identifying problems this child has, or them making them feel loved for and cared for, showing up to their plays, etc. So on proposition, you are completely giving all that attention towards that single child, and that child is far better off. Also, in the case where this child has, maybe a learning disability or a physical disability or requires more attention for some specific reason, you can give out all that attention if you only have 1 child, right? As opposed to, having 3 children. So if you were a child with, say, autism or Down syndrome, it's far better for you to be an only child receiving all your parents' attention than having 2 more siblings for your parents to also care for. The next thing you can talk about here is in terms of experience. When you have siblings, the issue is that your parents think they've figured out parenting with your first sibling, and they try to implement that parenting on you. The issue here is that every single child is unique. So even if you've parented a child before, the way they put your sibling to sleep or the way they taught your sibling to read isn't going to work for you always, right? Each child is unique, and the problem is, so on proposition, they're going to find, even if it takes longer, right, they still have parenting books and relatives to guide them. They're going to be able to cater specifically to you, and they'll be listening to you. Whereas if you are a middle child, they're probably going to try to enforce what they did with their first child on you, and for you as a child, that isn't excellent parenting because you are it's not working for you, so they're not catering to your needs. The next thing you can talk about here is in terms of pressure, and here you can push the idea. So on prop, I'd recommend that you say on either side, children, given that this is Sri Lanka, they're going to be compared to other children anyway, like friends and relatives. The difference then is on opposition, in addition to all of that, you're also going to be compared to your siblings. And this is very harmful because these are people you grew up in your same houses, people that you're said to love, but your parents essentially compare you to them. And even if it's not your parents, people, relatives, people, teachers are constantly going to do that. And that's extremely harmful in terms of pressure. But also on proposition, you need to push that parents are more understanding, right? Because they only have one child, they can't afford to lose that child, right? So what this looks like is, say your parents are very religious and you want to marry somebody of a different faith, right? Even if your parents are angry at first, because you are their only child, right, they're going to make a massive effort to be able to, like, come to terms with your decision, to understand your decisions better, and to make those compromises and build a better relationship with you. So you're less likely to have children disown for various reasons, if you were an only child. Second idea you can run here is in terms of siblings. The first thing you need to push is that siblings don't always get on. They don't magically get on with you, right? And this is very harmful because you're put in a house with them constantly, right? And you're forced to love each other, right? Share things with each other, and you don't always get on, right? And this is harmful because, especially if you grow up in a household where you're constantly being compared to each other, and it's more than likely that you don't really get on with your siblings. Second thing you can push here is it really important to portray this child as not an isolated being. They still have friends, and if at all, they'll probably be these friends will probably be they're more likely to make better friendships because they don't have siblings to rely on, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? They'll have to invest in friendship because they don't always get along with their siblings, whereas friends are people they can choose, right? So they'll be selective in picking really good friendships, right? They're not this isolated being that can't talk to anyone and doesn't know to share. They still have friends, they still have other family members. The last thing here is about pressure. When you have a middle child, they're uniquely put in this position where they live in the shadow of their older sibling. And we see this happen a lot where, teachers call the middle child by their older sibling's name. But in addition to having all this pressure of living up to your older sibling, you're also put in the position to be an example for your younger sibling. And this is a terrible position to put a child in. So these are the main ideas you can run for prop. For opposition, the main ideas you can run is, firstly, in terms of parenting, you can talk about, first off, they have enough resources to fund all three children, right? But in terms of mental resources, you can say that even if it's limited, even if there's going to be less attention, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Even with resources, it's not always a good thing to throw money and all your attention onto the child whenever they want. They tend to get spoiled at that, right? So you can run that argumentation. In addition to that, you can say that because your time with this child is so limited, right? Because you have three children to spend the same amount of time you would have, you learn to spend it in the most efficient way, right? And what this looks like is you taking the time to figure out what's the best way I can spend time with my child. Does this child prefer watching a movie with me? Does this child just prefer talking with me and having dinner with me? And that's unique to your side, where parents take this extra effort. In addition to that, they also have better experience. So even if parenting each child is unique, you doing that once before gives you far more experience, because the first child's the guinea pig, right? Parents go into this completely blind and they learn all of these things. So even if they think that's right, it's still better than not knowing anything at all, because books and relatives telling you can only get you so far. Practically, parenting one child gives you a lot more resources and you're far better equipped this time, right? But thirdly, in terms of pressure, if you have an only child, you are far more pressured to cater to your parents' expectation. Your parents' expectations are very large here. The problem with this is that the child's options become limited because they, have to fall in line with what their parents want them to do, right? Or even if, say they have homophobic parents and this child comes out as gay, right? They're more likely to be disowned on proposition because that's their only child, right? And they see their child, okay, this is my only child, this is a failure, let me disown them, right? Whereas in opposition, you have siblings to defend you. You have more than one child, so you don't always have this pressure. So even if you're homophobic, you're more likely to come to terms with it faster and more likely to come to terms with it in general, because you have more children, right? So you don't have this idea that, okay, this is the one egg I have and it broke. You don't have that kind of mentality pushing you, right? And you don't have this whole thing about careers. Lastly, in terms of siblings, right? So first you can push that these children, have better skill sets because they're constantly living with their siblings. It's different to having friends, right? So on your paradigm, kids still have friends. This kid still has friends. But they also have a sibling, right? What this looks like is, you sharing certain resources. You sharing out like resources. And one thing I also like forgot to mention in the first part is, given that these people are rich, they are the people that probably have more time, right? This looks like, they can hire a maid instead of having to do cleaning after work to spend with their children. Right. So jumping back to what I was saying, in terms of communication skills, they have a far better skill set, like in terms of sharing, in terms of making compromises, in terms of identifying when their siblings are upset, because they're constantly living with them. That's the difference. Secondly, you can talk about how they have someone that has already done something for them. They have this older sibling that has paved the way for them, right? So instead of saying it's like pressurizing, it's actually pretty helpful, right? So for example, if you want to introduce your significant other to your parents, it's much easier if you have an older sibling that has already done that for you, because you don't have to have the pressure of doing it for the first time. Whereas if you're an only child, you're more likely going to be protected and sheltered because that's the only child you have, right? So even when it comes to telling your parents an important decision, you're going to overthink it so much and go through it so much before telling them, and you don't have a sibling that has already done it for you, right? So on opposition, it's far better because you have someone, right? But in addition to that, you also have a younger sibling, you also have a younger sibling that you can influence and encourage and everything, and that's also another unique set of skills. And the next thing is really, really important in terms of communication. So if you come from a very healthy household, that's still really good because you learn to have somebody that's within the same house as you, and there are certain things that you can tell your siblings. You can tell your parents, of course you have a good relationship with your parents, but there are certain things whether it's telling your crush to your parents, or some think it's easier to tell someone that's closer to you in age, and you have the comfort of telling it to your sibling, and they probably won't judge you for it because they live with you. They've seen they've probably seen you in your most embarrassing moments. So it's easier for these kids to tell a sibling, whereas on a proposition they don't have that luxury, right? In addition to this, I think this is really important. When children come from abusive households, even if they're financially stable, that doesn't guarantee that they come from a healthy household. In the cases that they are in an abusive household, these middle children are put in a unique situation where they have an older sibling. They actually at least have somebody with them in the that understands their situation and they can work together. Whereas on proposition, if you come from an abusive household, you're on your own almost. Whereas on opposition, you have an older sibling that's looking out for you. You also have a younger sibling that you can protect. But it's not entirely pressure of, okay, let me protect my younger sibling, because you still have your older sibling looking after you. That's a very unique set of skills this child learns, and of a terrible situation they're placed in, right? So they're more likely to recover from the trauma of it or get out of that situation at the point they have siblings to do that for them, right? Apart from that, clashes, I think one clash probably on which side does the child is more likely to succeed in terms of the resources, attention, and effort that their parents give them. Secondly, I think pressure will become a pretty big clash in this debate. On which side does the child feel more pressured on? Thirdly, in terms of the unique skill set that this child has, whether it's being able to communicate to their siblings or sharing, or on proposition, good friendships, things that they learn in terms of decision making. I think those are the three main clashes. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.